Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Once again, I am streaming live from the Bitcoin Magazine headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. And I have a very special guest today, Lawrence Lepard. And he, coincidentally, I was talking about this with him off air. Coincidentally, we had this plan for a couple weeks now. And this just happened to be the day that the Bank of England pivoted. And from my perspective, they turned on the money printer once again. Now, I know that on Twitter, we see a lot of the heavyweights, James Lavish, Greg Foss, yourself, Lawrence, and so many people talking about what exactly is going on, and they'll put these Bloomberg terminal pictures and all that stuff. And I think that I've had to learn a lot about this stuff making Bitcoin content, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that don't quite understand the significance of what happened today. So from your perspective, Lawrence, what happened today? Was it a big deal? Was it the inevitable that they were always going to turn on the money printer once again?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and for those who haven't followed the news, obviously the biggest thing that happened today is the Bank of England pivoted. They had been doing QT and been pushing rates up, and they're pretending like everything was fine. And in fact, um, and the headlines were rather 2008-ish. They said that they had to reverse their policies, not necessarily on the interest rates, but on the QT side, and they were going to increase QE, and they had to intervene in the markets to prevent the collapse of the gilt market and the British pound. And they were going to do so by direct intervention into the marketplace, which is really historic and important, and kind of reminds me of 2008. Things were breaking or are breaking. They're breaking so fast that they had to do it without delay. And I don't have these to pull up in front of me. Maybe you can access charts and pull them up, but if you go look at a chart of the British gilt, the 30-year bond, I mean, it was almost in a free fall, and the interest rate was in turn, or the pound, I'm sorry, was also in a free fall. And this is because of the policies that they've had to put in to protect their citizens from the outrageous increase in electrical costs. I mean, we've all seen the tweets of guys who are running pubs and bakeries and so forth, and even in their homes, people seeing 2, 3, 4x increases in their underlying electricity rates. And then the new British Prime Minister, Truss, came in and said, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to cap your costs, and we're going to cover the difference over 2,500, I believe it was, for households, and some similar number for businesses. I don't know the specifics, but of course that's fine, and one could argue that is the right policy to protect their citizens. The question is, of course, where are they going to find the money to do it? And they don't. It's not like they're running a big surplus, right? They don't really have the money. Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. They don't really have the money to do it, and as a result, they're going to have to print the money to do it. And so, this printing was started. I think they announced the coverage or the protection of the electrical costs a couple, 10 days ago or so, and obviously the bond market and the gilt market, the bond market in gilts and the pound reacted quite negatively, and it was becoming kind of a rout. And so they got in there and they reversed their policies. It was a huge pivot, incredibly important. And I think what it says, what it shows is this problem is coming to all central banks. And the Japanese have been doing this for a while, but everyone kind of looks at the Japanese and says, well, yeah, that's old news over there. But in Britain, they had not been pursuing these policies, and they suddenly changed. And the headlines were scary, right, to everybody. And what it said to me is, the system is breaking. It reminds me very much. I mean, I feel like we're in July or August of 2008. It hasn't totally broken. The Fed hasn't pivoted, but it shows that what the Fed is doing in terms of tightening monetary policy and withdrawing accommodation, quantitative tightening, it's just not going to work. I mean, they can't effectively do it. They're going to be forced into pivoting, or else they're going to have a big hole in the ground that used to be the economy. I mean, it's going to look like 1929. So to me, it was enormously significant. And the Bitcoin price firmed up a tad, I believe. But more importantly, the gold market smelled it in size, and the gold market was up $30 on the day. That's 1.9%. Silver was up 53 cents on the day, which is 2.86%. And so, the markets took note, and of course, the U.S. markets caught a bid. Everything changed. S&P was up. I mean, pretty much everything was up, and gold stocks, which is what my fund focuses on mostly, although I have a lot of Bitcoin as well. The GDXJ was up 7.76% in one day. That's a pretty large move. And so, what I see and what I've seen for some time, I mean, all these governments are bankrupt, right? We know that, and all these fiat currencies are worthless. We know that, but they've been trying to pretend like those two things aren't true. And the result was a run on their currency and a run on their bonds. And so, in order to hold things together, they had to step into these markets and change their policies. And I think that it's only a matter of time until the Fed is forced to do the exact same thing. So, and I think the market realized that, worldwide. And, in my opinion, the bottom is in now for, gold and Bitcoin, very clearly. And it's only a matter of time until, the problem accelerates in other areas. I mean, look, there are, trillions and trillions of dollars of derivatives, and most of those derivatives are bets on interest rates and bonds. And when you get the moves of the size that we've had in the last few weeks, the U.S. 10-year going straight up, and other bond market, yield on the U.S. 10-year going straight up, the bonds going straight down, and all these other things. What you see is a system breaking apart, and which is fine. I mean, it is what it is. But the policymakers, are going to be forced to respond because they can't have their bonds falling apart. I mean, the U.S. Treasury bond is the 10-year is the measure of interest rates for the entire world, and the government is unable to fund itself, at T-bond rates. Yeah, look at I don't know what you're looking at. We should look at that's a shorter term, right?
Opti, pull it to a 5-year scale, please.
Yeah,
Thanks,
do a
brother.
5-year. Well, that's gold. Yeah, go to if you're able to put in U.S. 2-year or U.S. 10-year on the bond. What are you on for charting software there?
Pull up the 2-year and 10-year Treasury bond, Opti. That's
Yeah,
what you got to
that'd be
search on
helpful.
Google.
You can see what was going on. I mean, the
So
Treasury bond and the 2-year bond. Well, the Treasury bond's gone up substantially, and the 2-year has gone up even faster. And so, when the U.S. has got $30+ trillion of debt, at an average interest cost of, kind of 2, trending towards 3, but as all that rolls, it's going to go to the 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically, you cannot, you can't fund yourself, and so you get into what Lavish, myself, Foss, and others have said is a debt death spiral, which is to say higher interest rates are going to cause the government to be unable to fund itself. And okay, fine. So how does the government react to that? They react the way the BOE just did, and they buy the Treasury bond. How do they buy it? They buy it with money they don't have, money they printed, and that is really kind of that's the crux of the matter, that they are going to be forced into printing because, as Max has said so many times, you can't taper a Ponzi. We're kind of in a print or die environment. And so, that couldn't be better for sound money alternatives, gold and Bitcoin.
So, and another aspect, right? It's with the rates being raised at this level, and when you were talking, Lawrence, I was getting goosebumps, and the reason is because I don't think in 2008 they're turning on the money printer when the UK has a 10% inflation rate, not to mention the energy crisis where people can't afford power, right? And then the response by Ursula, the president of the European Union, was price controls. We're going to nationalize this stuff. We're going to tax the energy companies.
Yeah.
Again, from my perspective, and like I always say, guys, I went straight into the Bitcoin world. I missed the traditional world, but just basic common sense here. If you're going to print money to try to rescue yourself from this situation, and you're already dealing with 10% inflation. I'm looking
you're gonna make
I'm
it worse. I mean,
I'm
this is
looking at it, but not just worse. This is a catastrophe that I'm seeing unfolding before my eyes in the next 6 or 10 years. If you're under the age of 35, you're not going to be able to own anything because it's becoming so expensive to borrow. This is worse than 2008, and
oh
that's
yeah.
just from my perspective.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is much worse than 2008. I mean, 2008 was focused on, the banks in the United States and the housing market in the United States. And obviously 2008 was quite bad, but this is at a level above that, which is the sovereign debt level. And, what we're seeing here is pension funds and governments, that created this everything bubble by mispricing fiat currency for so long. I mean, ZERP interest rates from, 2009 to 2015 just created enormous distortions. And this is why we call it the everything bubble. There's just so much money out there flying around that nobody really knows what the price of anything should be or is. And nobody really knows what fiat currency is worth. In fact, you and I think, believe that it's worth nothing. But the world certainly, the normies certainly haven't believed that for some long time. And they, are coming to see the fundamental mathematical problem that Greg has so accurately and consistently pointed out. Greg Foss, I'm referring to. The bond market is schooling the central banks, and they've got a real problem. I mean, you can bet that there are people in, all the central banks all over the world right now who are looking at this and going, "Oh shit, what do we do now?" It's going to be zigzaggy. I don't want to get carried away and say it's definitely all over right here, right now, but it kind of feels that way to me. It's very, very serious, and they're unlikely to, be able to unspill this milk. So, I think it's only a matter of time. I mean, I think it's interesting that gold smelled it first. Usually does, gets bigger, more widely distributed, and it's the more traditional sound money asset. But Bitcoin will smell it too, and Bitcoin will follow gold. I think it's very interesting that when they did it in 2020, which was kind of a miniature of this, the COVID-driven money printing episode, gold took off immediately. I mean, it just out of the hole in March of 2020, gold shot up like a rocket, and Bitcoin went up, but not as much. But then, if you notice, a few months later, Bitcoin came on and passed gold in spades. I mean, it's a better alternative, but it took a while for that to occur. And so I've long contended that Bitcoin leads gold, or I'm sorry, that gold leads Bitcoin in terms of these price moves, but Bitcoin outperforms gold once it gets going. So, and I hold both, but the fund I manage is more focused. It's about 80% gold stocks and 20% Bitcoin related. So, yeah, look at that move. Off the bottom, you can see leave that there for a moment. That's the U.S. 10-year. Notice how on a spike low, it was as low as 30 or 40 bips. And now today, actually, before all this happened, it had just crossed 4%. I was making a bet on Twitter about when that would happen. I guessed it would happen today. It was a lucky guess, but it crossed 4% this morning, and then I went and did my workout. I came back and somebody said the BOE pivoted, and I said, "Oh yeah, big deal." But then I looked at it, and hey Jose, gold is not shit. Okay, gold's been around for 5,000 years. All right, get a grip. So, it's a mess. It's a real mess.
Oh man. So where does this go from now? Look, the reaction that I saw and I'm going to change the topic a little bit. It's all connected, right?
Yep.
The recent digital assets framework by the White House, and there was actually a report by the U.S. Treasury called "The Future of Money." In this report, we covered it on the show. There was no mention of Bitcoin. There was the only innovations that they spoke of was payment systems like Venmo and PayPal and Cash App and all that stuff, and of course, central bank digital currencies and stablecoins. There was no mention of Bitcoin. So
No.
the reason I'm bringing this up, Lawrence, is because clearly they're positioning themselves in a way, and it was actually Druckenmiller that tweeted this out. It was Zero Hedge that actually tweeted out. It was quoting had said, if this situation gets worse for central banks, people are going to start seeking alternatives in cryptocurrencies. But from my perspective, maybe it's selfish. I don't know. I think that's a good thing. And not cryptocurrencies, but specifically Bitcoin. I was just quoting the Zero Hedge tweet. From your perspective, how will this giant bureaucratic state, this administrative state that will do anything to ensure its survival, right? I know that you're a believer
Yeah.
in the CIA assassinating JFK.
Yeah.
How will they react to this? At the end of the day, the United States government is the most powerful government in the world.
Right.
It is the largest employer in the world. It employs 9 million people, federal full-time workers. On
Right.
top of that, it's 16 million federal contractors if you add the full-time workers. That is
Right.
a machine. That is a monster. That is a
Oh,
creature in itself.
absolutely. I mean, look, what we know is that they'll do anything they can to protect their privilege. They've done it in the past. They changed the rules. We don't know. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing. We can make guesses as to what they'll do. In a similar sovereign debt crisis, I mean, Roosevelt confiscated the gold at 6102. He stole it from the people and devalued it by 70%, which is one of the flaws with gold. But it's very hard to say. I mean, they could theoretically, they could shut the markets. They could pivot. Jay Powell could get fired, which I'm actually beginning to think is a real possibility. They need to change this policy. It's mathematically obvious that they need to change this policy, and they will, because as bad as the inflation we have is, driving the economy into a complete depression where nothing functions because money is too expensive and the government can't pay its bills, and the markets all go to zero. That's a worse alternative than high inflation. I mean, high inflation is bad, don't get me wrong. I mean, the sad thing is that what they've done is painted themselves and us into a corner, and we're all going to suffer greatly as a result of this. But we're not the ones who are pulling the levers at the top, and we didn't design this broken system. And the bright news is, Nico, that the system is going to fail and a better system is going to emerge that's based on a sound money alternative, which will be Bitcoin ultimately. But in the interim, I think gold will play a role as well.
Oh man. So Lawrence, what could the average person do to protect themselves from what is coming? Because you're not the only person that has been saying this, but I think that the old. First of all, this has never happened in my lifetime. Okay, so
No, it hadn't happened to mine either. I mean, upsets like this have happened. I mean, I've seen big financial disruptions, but this is bigger and at a higher level than anything I've seen to date. This is bigger than 2008, or it will be when it's all said and done.
How long
So,
will this last? People are saying that this is not a recession that's incoming. People are saying that this is a depression. This will be multiple years. There is no easy fix out of that. There is no easy out. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Although, people often say, well, you're critical of the system. What would you do to fix it? I mean, there actually is a solution. They need to confess and do a monetary reset to a sound money standard. The odds of them doing that, are, in my opinion, quite low. They won't do that until they're forced to do it. But the problem is too much debt, and they should devalue the currency, in Bitcoin and gold terms. But as I say, they're not going to do it because they're trying to protect their privilege. So what they will do is they'll do everything they can to not, to try and prevent us from succeeding. But there are millions of us or billions of us, and there are only a small number of them. and we're just going to run them over. You know, they're screwed. I mean, they're completely screwed. Now, you know, the sad thing is that, you know, at least people watching this are probably very much aware of the problem and have taken the moves to protect themselves. I mean, I get a lot of emails that, hey, I'm just a regular guy out here working in the middle of America. You know, what do I do to protect myself? I'm not supposed to give financial advice, so this is just my own personal opinion. This is not financial advice, right? However, the worst thing anyone could ever own right now is bonds. Bonds are absolutely worthless. They're reward-free risk. So you got to be totally out of bonds. I happen to think that stocks will ultimately suffer as well. They haven't yet. It's kind of been a surprise to me how well the stock market has held together. It's teetering right on making new lows, but it hasn't done it yet. You know, I advocate and I believe that everybody needs to have a portion of their wealth in tangible things. I mean, when the money is failing, things have value. I mean, what's happened here is, you know, the moves by Russia have basically made commodities, you know, the new form of money. You know, oil, gas, etc. And Bitcoin and gold are both tied to commodities because you can't produce either one without commodity inputs. And so they're a proxy for the underlying commodities. And, you know, therefore, I think, you know, the worst thing you could do would be to have your money in bonds. Probably the second worst thing you could do would be to have your money in cash. And then maybe the third worst thing to do would be to be in stocks, you know, particularly, you know, meme stocks or technology stocks or, you know, growth stocks, because I think going through this, the world isn't going to grow very much. The world's going to be it's going to be a very messy and chaotic transition period. It's going to look a lot like the 70s. In the 70s, you know, the two great investments in the 70s, well, three great investments really. One was housing. If you owned a house and you didn't lose it, i.e. you weren't too levered, your house went up enormously in value. I mean, my parents bought a house in Ann Arbor, Michigan in the 60s for 40 or 50,000. At the end of the 70s, it was probably worth 300 or 400, which in investment terms is a pretty good deal. You know, and then the other two areas that performed extraordinarily well were gold and oil. You know, both commodity based in a heavily inflationary environment. But Powell has made a colossal error here. He thinks he's Paul Volcker, and he's not. He can't be because of the debt levels that we've accumulated. It's not the same set of circumstances. And so, you know, to the degree he tries to solve this by raising interest rates, it's just plain stupid. It's not going to solve the problem. I mean, part of the reason why these commodity prices are going up so much is because, you know, we've had supply destruction, and, you know, we need more supply. I mean, what Biden should be doing, you know, is he should have, I mean, the way to create more supply is to let the prices go up. He actually should have let the price of oil go up, not released the oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He should have, you know, keeping interest rates low would have allowed people to invest in and build more capacity to produce more oil and gas, which is what we badly need. So, you know, they're doing it all wrong. I mean, these guys are idiots. They're absolute idiots, and they're evil, in my opinion, because they changed the rules to suit their own needs. I mean, notice, you know, I love the way the Fed guys all got, you know, they were insider trading. You know, they resigned at the top and sold all their stocks. I mean, they're not stupid. They're evil, but not stupid. So, you know, it's the average person, in my opinion, should batten down the hatches, hold sound money, live within your means. Don't be overly levered. It's going to be extremely volatile. I mean, this stuff has gone up and down quite a bit. You know, and I mean, it's been hard. You know, my fund is down substantially this year. But, you know, I'm not long term, I'm not concerned about it. You know, I do find it annoying because I just feel like we've got these idiots driving the clown car.
So you mentioned something interesting, and I want to explore that topic, right, from your perspective, of course. And you said that they're going to try to do anything and everything to try to protect that privilege.
Yep.
What is that privilege, Lawrence? What are you talking about?
Well, the privilege is the privilege to print money, to control and print money. You know, the fiat game has enabled them to become enormously rich, and the people closest to the source of the money, it's the Cantillon effect, right? I mean, Ken Griffith should be bankrupt and in jail. You know, I'm trying to call the name of the fellow who used to run Goldman Sachs. He used to tweet. Somebody help me out here. He used to tweet all the time, you know, about various things, and I just thought, you know, that's really rich. Here's a guy who in 2008 would have been bankrupt if the government hadn't bailed him out. And now he's offering, advice on military matters and so on and so forth. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And, they protect themselves. And at the expense of the rest of us. We all pay for it. That's why millennials can't buy houses, because they're competing with BlackRock, who's buying up houses. I mean, it's just it's incredibly, incredibly broken. And we haven't seen. I mean, the problem most investors face is that they're depending on when you enter the market and how old you are. If you enter the market anytime after 2008, you haven't seen a bear market. All you've seen is a buy the dip environment. And I'm here to say that there's no doubt in my mind that we are going to have a bear stock market before this is over. So I think you got to be out of stocks, and I think you have to hold sound money or things that are tied to sound money. And in that case, it would be Bitcoin miners, gold miners, silver miners.
So what you're describing, right, and the the infamous example of 2008, right, where the federal government picked and chose which ones of these investment banks survived. In the case of the recent what just happened with the Bank of England, Lawrence, correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't sound like capitalism to me whatsoever.
It's not even close to capitalism. I mean, this is crony capitalism. This is state capitalism. Yeah, thanks for thinking of Lloyd Blankfein. Sadly, at my age, sometimes you forget obvious shit. But yeah, he's the guy who ran Goldman Sachs. Yeah, no, it's not anything close to capitalism. It's completely unfair, and what it speaks to is why we in the sound money movement all need to educate as many people as we possibly can that the only solution to this problem is to end the Fed. I mean, we should not have a Federal Reserve. The notion of having a group of people sitting in Washington, I think they've got 40,000 employees and hundreds of PhDs on their staff telling us what the price of money should be. That's ridiculous. I mean, when I was younger, the Soviets used to set the price of grain, because it was a communist system, and that's what they did. And they'd always set it wrong, so they either have a surplus or they'd be starving and they'd have a deficit. I mean, capitalism is based on prices. Prices are information. Information is what drives human activity. And if human activity is not correct, if you don't have the right price information, you're going to make the wrong decisions. And we've been making so many wrong decisions for so long that nobody really knows what the price of anything is today, what the real true price of anything is today. And, that's why we are where we are. And that's why we're going to suffer the way we're going to suffer. And before this is over, I mean, Jay Powell and Bernanke and all these Fed chairs, even Greenspan, I mean, these guys are going to be in the history books, right there with John Law, who ran the Mississippi bubble back in France in the 1700s. And so, they broke the system. They broke the system for their own benefit, and they're very rich. And the average person's working, the average person's purchasing power wages since 1971 have not kept up with the increases in productivity. And, we should all be working 30-hour weeks and living better than our parents did in the 60s and 70s. And in fact, you have to have two people working to support a household. One of the reasons I think the employment numbers are as good as they are is people are hurting so bad they've had to take extra jobs. I know people working 2 and 3 jobs just to cover their costs. I mean, I just got an electrical bill that was 65% higher than my electrical bill for the same month last year. And, it's horrible. I mean, it's horrible. It's unfair. It's why for so many years I've been fighting for sound money. I backed Ron Paul. I ran some advertisements in national papers to support him. Before Bitcoin even existed, there were a lot of us who were talking, gold bugs, who were talking about how broken this system was. And then Bitcoin came along, which is fabulous because it educated a whole, Safe's book, which was really going to go down as one of the great historical economics books, educated an entire generation of 30-year-olds, 20 and 30-year-olds, what sound money is all about in the Austrian School of Economics. And, so now I feel like at least I've got reinforcements. I was truly a voice in the wilderness 20 years ago. Even in 2008, there weren't that many people who were fighting for sound money. And I've been fighting for it pretty much for my whole career.
Yeah,
So
it's, you know, and once again, just to kind of, in my personal experience and what you said about Safe in his book, I skipped that entire, just I went straight to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the soundest money that's ever been created, that
right,
exists, right? And looking back, I'm perplexed. I'm like, how do people function on this mindset? But here's another thing, Lawrence, and I was actually talking to a buddy of mine about this, right?
right,
Is that in 2008, right? Well, what the Austrian school would say, listen, booms and busts, normal. When the bust happens, the less efficient companies will go under, and from the ashes the phoenix will rise and will become better companies, right?
right. That's the theory.
But that's the theory, right? But that is very painful. I think what I've learned, or what I've noticed in the last 2 years, is that people like bailouts. Like they perhaps they're not thinking about the long-term consequences, but the political willpower is there to soften the short-term blow, and at the expense of course, the future generations.
Right. No, that's Greg's point. I mean, he's in this fight for the kids, and I am too. I mean, look, I don't have to be doing this, but I feel passionate about doing this because I have an understanding of it, and I just think the world is, we're spinning towards a really bad outcome, and the only way to avoid that bad outcome is to return to sound money. I mean, studying hyperinflations. I mean, I've studied economics my entire life. I've been an investor my entire life, and studying hyperinflations. One thing I can say is that when they're over and you reset to a sound currency, things get better real quickly. I mean, this is not an unsolvable problem. It is a solvable problem, and I'm very optimistic about how the world will look on the other side of this monetary reset, which is in the process of taking place. So, like Jeff, I'm extremely positive about where we can go, but we're not there yet. And I think you've heard me say in the past, this is a fourth turning, right? I mean, this is a crisis. It's going to get to be a bigger crisis, and the crisis is centered on the fact that we built our house on sand, unsound money, fiat money, and fiat always returns to zero, you know, and it's in the process of doing so right now.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the monetary reset, and I'm a big believer in the fourth turning theory as
Yeah,
well, right? We are definitely in it. There's this famous quote where, there is decades that nothing happens, and then there's years that decades happen. I think really since 2016, 2017, we're experiencing decades and decades of occurrences that I think is waking a lot of people up. It's uprooting society completely. What is this monetary reset, Lawrence? What does that mean? What does that entail?
well, it's I can't tell you, Nico. I wish I could give you kind of a simple answer, but I can't because there are so many variables involved and so many people involved, and there's a lot of history and momentum in fiat. And fiat's not going to go away overnight. But what we're seeing are these increasingly large waves and swings of the fiat system not working and being out of control. I mean, and I mean, we saw a little bit of it in '98 with LTCM when they first started printing money to, the Russian crisis and to bail out Bear Stearns and all those companies. We saw, the housing bubble was a part of it, and that was when I really got radicalized for sound money. I mean, when they did the bailout in 2008, that was probably the biggest crime, the biggest economic crime that's occurred in the United States almost since the founding of the country. I mean, the notion that they would protect one class of people and disadvantage the rest of the country it was an incredible crime. Ben Bernanke should be in jail. But the and I thought, by the way, I thought right then, and this is why I'm hesitant to say how quickly it's going to happen this time. And right then I thought, okay, that's it. This is over. This fiat system is going to blow apart. Well, guess what? They put it all back together, and they created, they printed $3 or $4 trillion. Of course, it took 3 years. In the COVID crisis, they did the same amount or slightly more in 18 months. And that was kind of, that was one swing, and then they got it all back under control, and they took it up to the next level, which was a sovereign debt level. they held interest rates at zero with ZERP, and that distorted everything even further. They created the everything bubble. I mean, they statistically, they say there wasn't a lot of inflation from '08 to say, call it 2017, 2018. I mean, they had it pinned at 2%. I mean, they were lying because shadow government numbers are much higher, but there was a lot of inflation in financial assets, right? All that, those reserves that they created, put on the balance sheets of banks, those all got cycled into the stock market. And, so we created really this Potemkin village of fake prices in financial assets based on too much money flowing around. And, all the deflationists said, well, it's going to be deflation forever. Don't worry about it. I mean, the Lacey Hunts of the world were just dead ass wrong. And obviously COVID triggered it. I mean, it really got started before COVID, though, because when the repo blowout occurred and, the 2018, pivot, and then the repo blowout following that was the beginning of it. And then, of course, when COVID hit and Powell had his, whatever it takes moment where he, imitated Draghi and came over the top with just an enormous set of accommodations. And of course, Congress went crazy and we handed out all these PPP loans. I mean, some of those loans went to businesses that did not need them. I mean, I know people who have perfectly healthy businesses got huge loans. All they had to do was say they weren't going to fire anybody. And, they got to collect millions of dollars. I mean, it was nuts. And, then they claimed there wouldn't be inflation, which was an enormous policy mistake. They kept loose for far too long, more policy mistake. Now they see they've got inflation. And as I said, I think I've used this analogy in the past. I mean, they're driving a clown car on an icy road. One guardrail is, massive inflation, and the other guardrail is massive deflation. And so by all the printing and the activities they took post-COVID, they drove us towards the massive inflation guardrail. And sure enough, we got it, right? I mean, rents were up 18%, housing prices were up 20%. There were bidding wars for houses. I mean, the cost of everything was going up relentlessly. When they finally woke up to the fact that they screwed up, and they even admitted they screwed up, then they thought, oh shit, and they grabbed the steering wheel and drove hard in the other direction and said, we can solve this. Our credibility is real. We can tighten up and we'll control inflation. And, okay, fine. That's kind of what they've tried to do. But the fact of the matter is that, by doing so, they're gonna destroy the economy. I mean, you cannot. I mean, all these asset prices are gonna, plunge. And so, I mean, it's like the meme on Twitter where, pick one. Control inflation or create the Great Depression. I mean, the policies they're following right now will literally take all the financial markets to zero if they don't change policy, because nobody has any cash right now, and all these dollar debts are coming due, and there are no new dollars flowing into the system. M2 is flat to down. I mean, it's never slowed. It went up enormously, and now it's flat to slightly declining. And so, as a result of that, they're in a box, and and we can talk about kind of the little micro moves that they've made, one way or the other, but they're screwed. And so I think the good news is that I think what's going to happen here is that thanks. You can see M2 is just slightly declining, but given how much it had grown and the rate, notice the steady rate from 2010 to 2020, that if you don't have that, a fiat credit-based system does not work. It will. I mean, you're creating more and more debt. You've got to pay interest on that debt. Unless you can get GDP growth to match the growth in the debt, which it hasn't for years, you don't have the income to service the debt, and so the debt goes bad unless you print the money to give people the ability to service the debt. And so, they can try. I mean, they can continue to try. He can take rates up to 9 or 10%, but half the world's going to go bankrupt. That's from my Twitter. I mean, that's it. That's the story, right? And I think that might be a little bit old. I think the debt line might have gotten a bit steeper, and so forth. So it's a mathematical fact. This isn't my opinion. It's just math, as Greg says. So, it's sad. It's really sad. But the good news is it's going to come to a head, and at least bringing it to a head will then, I think, lead to a better system. It has to lead to a better system. But How we get from here to there, I'm not smart enough to know. I don't think anybody really is. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how it's going to unfold. My suspicion is that they will pivot and that they will try to print money, and we'll have a very highly inflationary environment. And I mean, there might be an Argentinian-like solution where we kind of get out of it by having high inflation for a bunch of years and getting GDP growth. And if they can do that, then theoretically, the debt burden would become more manageable at higher prices throughout the economy. But everyone would have suffered greatly through inflation. I mean, the bottom line is that there's just no free lunch in economics, right? And they've kind of tried to create and basically they've tried to create a free lunch, and it's politics. Wonder if Lawrence has ever seen the Yeah, absolutely. I go to the website all the time. I know the guy who developed it. He's great. I've met him many times. It's a great website. Yeah, I mean, Jeff's right. You can't have infinite growth in a planet with limited resources. I mean, what we should be aiming for is not growth. I mean, this is the Keynesian era, right? Keynesians say you got to just continue to grow. Growth is good. Intrinsically, growth is good. Bullshit. Growth isn't good. On a limited resource planet, misallocated, resources and growth, we'll run out of stuff. What's good is efficiency, and what's good is productivity, and what's good is deflation. And that's where the Keynesians are wrong. And we built our system on a Keynesian system. And as a result of it, we're in this, we're in this box canyon, and we can't turn around and get out of it. And I don't think the worst part of it is the way the political system is constructed. Most people don't even realize what's going on, and the policymakers aren't smart enough to even begin to contemplate this issue. And to the degree that they do, they realize that changing things would ruin their privilege, and so they're not going to change things. So, I mean, I think Bitcoin is God-given, and I think that there is a higher power, and I think the higher power is basically going to school us all into why, our grandkids are going to sit around and say, you guys were idiots. I mean, how did you ever let the government get control of the money supply and set the interest rates? What the fuck were you thinking? It's pretty obvious that the whole system was going to blow up eventually. Right.
So you mentioned earlier about how the potential solution would be an Argentinian type of situation where there's high inflation, but there's still GDP growth. Jack Dorsey tweeted, I think it was in 2021, that hyperinflation is coming. And one of the reasons that I believed it was we saw the legacy media machine go into overdrive, basically saying that his words are dangerous. Usually that's not a good sign, where if you speak a certain word about it, you could say anything you want about Bitcoin. It's been said. It's any criticism, but just the word triggered people. My question for you, Lawrence, is do you believe there could be potentially a hyperinflationary environment in the next 10 years or so?
Sadly, I do. I mean, I'm not proud of that. I'm not looking forward to it. I know that it'll cause enormous pain, but if you analyze what's going on here, I think it's a likely outcome, because I don't see a lot of intelligent, discourse at policymaker levels about what the problem is and how to solve it. And so, I think they're going to continue to stumble around between these two extremes, with and each fugoid wave is going to get bigger and bigger. I mean, it's, and ultimately, I mean, this goes back to, Gresham's law, right? I mean, money is just what everyone considers to be, a medium that you can exchange for goods and services. And so it's what people believe in. And, for a long time, fiat was somewhat stable. I mean, I emphasize somewhat. And so, the whole world is conditioned to believe in fiat. But once they begin to realize that their fiat is a melting ice cube, Gresham's law is going to kick in, which says the good money shoves out bad. And, gold's going to go plus 3,000, Bitcoin's going to go plus 100,000, and the bonds are going to continue to sell off, and the race is going to be on. And in today's interconnected world, where everybody knows, what's going on very, very quickly as a result of the internet, this may not take that long. I mean, it might actually all be over within 5 years. But I can't say. I mean, nobody can. Anybody who tells you they can is full of shit. I mean, I always tweet hyperinflation chart of the day because I believe there's a chance, and we're not even close to hyperinflation now. It's going to take a lot to get us into hyperinflation, but I'm not suggesting that, when push comes to shove, if you read the history of like Weimar as an example, they knew they should stop printing, but they couldn't. I mean, the alternative was to just collapse everything. And so, with each of these waves, they get further and further away from sound money, and the Bitcoin and gold people, grow in terms of understanding and knowledge, and the values grow. And the most natural human instinct is to want to save the fruits of your labor. So if you work and you have savings, you say to yourself, where am I going to put it so that this has value in the future? Because I want to be able to feed myself when I'm older. And, that people are going to realize that they've got to go for sound money alternatives. And so, I'm pretty sure that's where it's going. I can't really see any other way out. Like I said, they could reset it. I mean, if there was, there is an intelligent government policy that could be pursued. I mean, they could do a one-time reset deval where they say, $5 old dollars equals $1 new dollar. $1 new dollar is backed by a combination of gold, Bitcoin, and oil, or, whatever. And the new dollar would be something that would be trustworthy. But I don't see any talk or discussion of going in that direction. And I don't think with the political situation that we have, I don't think that's likely to arise anytime soon. Now, that could change, but that's kind of how I see it.
So you said something really interesting there about there being potentially a political solution if they're, at the the late really the 70s, you had Ronald Reagan, okay, in the White House.
Right.
And you had Paul Volcker, okay. You don't have those heavyweights. You have Jerome Powell, who's a lawyer, and you have Joe Biden, who doesn't know where he is. Okay, so you don't have the political heavy or intellectual heavyweights or the cojones, you might say, that they had in the late 70s, right, to fix that. But my perspective on this, right, is that would just fine. It would fix it. We would go on a sort of a sound money cycle, sound money standard, but the cycle would just repeat, right? Because if you look back in human history, right, the Romans did the same thing, right? In the Roman Republic, you started their currency was called the denarii. It started at like 0.83 silver, and then by the end of the Roman Empire, right, it was like 0.0000.
It was worthless.
It was worthless. So you could make the argument that we have been repeating this endless cycle over and over again, and I think with Bitcoin we have a chance to fundamentally break that cycle, and perhaps, yes, there's political solutions to it, but that won't be a long-term solution. And human beings, being human beings, will inevitably repeat the same mistakes they've been repeating in the past.
I completely agree. I mean, and that's why, as I say, I don't think the odds of a political solution are very high. And I think, it will become obvious that, and this is why we will eventually get to a Bitcoin standard. It will become obvious that it is the superior form of money. That'll just become obvious. But the thing I emphasize is, that could be in a year or two, unlikely. I mean, it could be in 10 years, it could be in 20 years, but we're going there quickly. And, there'll be lots of twists and turns along the way, and that's going to make it somewhat tough to navigate. But, if I had to pick one thing I wanted to give my grandkids, it would be Bitcoin. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. No, just one thing. Clearly, governments are putting their hopes and their dreams in central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
To use your word, I love that, to maintain their privilege of creating money for free that everybody else has to work for. Lawrence, what are your thoughts on central bank digital currencies?
Oh, I hate them. I mean, it's evil because they want to control you and everything else. But the thing to keep in mind about CBDCs, probably the only way they can have that somewhat work is they can say, you've got to pay your taxes in CBDCs. So we would all have to have a little bit of CBDC to pay taxes. But I can't think of any Bitcoiner that would ever accept a CBDC. I mean, it's just digital fiat. And so, yeah, they're hoping that they can come in with some, alternative solution and, take away. I mean, this is kind of like all the crypto grifters who are hoping that, crypto becomes the solution, and it's not. I mean, Bitcoin is unique unto itself. It's not crypto. Bitcoin is an incredible invention. It's an immutable form of digital scarcity that can't be corrupted. Having said that, there is one risk in Bitcoin, and that is that there are Bitcoin derivatives. And the point is that if people are stupid enough to accept paper Bitcoin and not the real thing where they hold their own keys, there's a chance that they can try and manipulate Bitcoin the way they've manipulated gold. And in fact, I watched, BlackRock has kind of pivoted and talked more about Bitcoin and being involved in Bitcoin. And it wouldn't surprise me if they actually got the nod to be the first Bitcoin ETF. And so they could do with that similar to what they've done with gold, which is to say, they would say, Bitcoin, or I'm sorry, they'd create a Bitcoin ETF, and then people would buy that ETF, and they wouldn't use it to buy the Bitcoin. So it'd be a form of paper Bitcoin, and they'd be sucking away demand and therefore able to suppress the price. I mean, there are already about $6 billion worth of Bitcoin derivatives in the world. I mean, if you look at the futures market and you go to Glassnode and you look at the chain there, you can see that people are trading Bitcoin derivatives. I'd never be stupid enough to own one, but that doesn't mean others won't. And when somebody buys a Bitcoin derivative, I mean, that is money that is not used to buy the real thing, right? So there is a risk there. But the point is, I think, that these governments are going to fail because they can't fund themselves. If we really have a complete and total hyperinflationary collapse, the government's going to fail too, and it's going to have to be restructured. And hopefully, what will happen is that Bitcoiners will be successful enough and well enough off that some of them will decide to enter public life and lead the way to doing what's right and returning us to sound money.
Hey, and you mentioned there, it is really interesting, right? Is that the money printer, the ability to, it's created an administrative state so large that it's starting to consume itself. It's so big that it can no longer fund itself, to the point
Right.
where, you in the Inflation Reduction Act, right?
Right.
It's absurd. They hire an army of 87,000 agents. By the way, that's larger than the United Kingdom's army today, which I find ironic because America was created because they didn't want to pay taxes anymore.
Absolutely.
Now you hired an army just bigger than the current United Kingdom army to extract even more wealth from your populace in a bill that's called inflation. And this is what I'm talking about, right? It's that it's no longer a government by the people for the people. It's a government by the government for the government employees. Now,
Exactly.
You said something really interesting about Bitcoin derivatives, and I'm going to tie this in with the government thing that I was talking about just now. It's really curious because the SEC approved futures.
-1, right? Isn't that amazing?
Futures, right? But spot, no.
Yeah. And they also, didn't they approve a short Bitcoin ETF? I believe they did. And isn't that interesting, right? I mean,
It's political. I can't come to another conclusion, right?
Yeah. Well, look, they understand. I mean, Bitcoin is an existential threat to fiat currency. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And they're not all smart enough to know that, but some of them are. And so, they're going to throw sand in our face for as long as they possibly can. We know that to be the case. But, in turn, we just keep marching along. Every 10 minutes there's a new block, and, we own sound money. They don't. I mean, the problem with the Bitcoin derivatives, everyone says, well, they start selling paper Bitcoin, they're going to get wrecked. Well, the thing you got to keep in mind is that, the government has an unlimited balance sheet. I mean, they probably keep two sets of books. And so I've seen them do it with the gold market for 30 years now, through the Cayman Islands and other sources. They sell paper gold that they don't have to suppress the gold price. And, if the gold price goes up and somebody's getting wrecked, they can just funnel them the paper. And they're parts of the government that basically are off the books, in my opinion. And they view having a sound dollar, I'm sure, is part of, it's talked about in the Pentagon. I mean, because Rickards and others, they war gamed it. And so, um, they basically will do whatever they can to keep the dollar alive. And if that includes selling unlimited paper Bitcoin, so be it. And you might say, well, they're going to get wrecked. Well, why? They have a printer, they take a loss, they just print the money to fill the loss up. You see what I'm saying? I mean, in a game like the game we've got, they've got the biggest balance sheet and they've got the printing press. So that's somewhat of a problem. So we've got to overwhelm them. I mean, I think I think the way we'll overwhelm them is that Gresham's law will get them. We just need, we need very consistent, adoption and growth in the price so that more and more people over longer and longer periods of time come to realize that this is the way. And, Bitcoin will be more fully distributed. It won't be as volatile and it'll be going up forever. And as a result, people will realize, holy shit, I got to get out of this fiat. But again, I mean, who knows? I mean, to some extent, it's possible that some of this volatility is created by the government. I mean, I know Caitlin and others have done pretty in-depth analysis that suggests that the last cycle should have gone much higher than $68,000, but it was capped, in the futures market. So
so that's not my strong suit, right? And Caitlin's done a great job on that. But
yeah,
from the perspective of a miner, right? The Chinese Communist Party banned Bitcoin mining
yeah,
literally in the middle of the run-up of the last Bitcoin bull market.
right,
Is that a
right.
coincidence, right? So,
Yeah, no.
Lawrence, is it too much to say that governments today are actively price suppressing Bitcoin in the hopes of slowing down adoption enough to implement central bank digital currency regimes?
I can't prove it, but it feels to me like there might be a little bit of it. I don't think they've got it suppressed nearly the way they suppress gold, but I do know that the odds, when it took off in the fall of 2020, when it went from kind of in the 5-10K range and shot up to 50. I mean, you can just bet that every single finance ministry throughout the world said, "Holy shit, we got a serious problem here." So, and I'm sure they've been thinking about wargaming. How do we address this problem? Um,
Oh man, yeah. I mean, you saw the bipartisan. By the way, there was a law in Congress that was passed very quickly when El Salvador, which GDP wise is very extremely small country, saying Bitcoin could potentially become a threat.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
thought that
Some
was
senator was
interesting.
out hammering Bukele for I don't know what reason. And it's like, why would he even give a shit about El Salvador? I mean, why would he even care?
Yeah.
I mean, well, I know why he cares. I mean, they know. Look, you know, here's the thing: the best piece of news is there are so many more of us, and the internet. I mean, look, we have a centralized system, and it really worked well for them. I mean, the New York Times told you what the truth was, the government told you what the truth was, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the internet coming along has been wonderful, right? Because it allowed us all to communicate with one another very inexpensively and to create alternative views or I believe much more accurate views of what the truth is. And so, and so you're seeing the internet is basically messing with their narrative. And, consider the legacy news networks. I mean, there's some great charts that show how Joe Rogan is basically burying CNN. And that's because people know when they're being lied to. I mean, if you piss on their leg and say it's raining, they figure it out. And so all we got to do is educate as many normies as we possibly can. And guess what? Having your electrical bill go up 100%, having a hard time buying food, having your family suffer, being a millennial that's getting screwed. I mean, you tend to get educated. It's like, what the fuck? You're messing up my life in a big way. God damn it. I mean, you've seen these protests in Europe, the farmers and others. You saw the truckers protest. I mean, this is only going to grow. This movement, it's only going to grow. Pierre Poilievre, the guy who is now the Conservative Party leader in Canada, I mean, he might get elected. right? And that would be fabulous. And so he's a Bitcoiner. He's a friend of Booth and Foss. So, it's common. It's common. I mean, we don't have our Ron Paul yet. We need a Bitcoin Ron Paul, but that's coming. It'll happen. It's people are smart, and it can take some time, no doubt. But we've got a much better hand. I mean, I like the side that we're on in this whole fight. I mean, we're going to win. I mean, Marty Bent has it right. We are going to win. There is no doubt we are going to win. Now, the time scale, that's a different matter. And I prefer it happen sooner rather than later because I'm not as young as you. And I want to see it. So.
Yeah, and I've talked to Opti about this many times. For particularly my generation, the millennial generation, we don't have an alternative. So for us, it's like it's this or slavery, right?
Right.
And they're even telling the quintillionaires are even telling you'll own nothing and be happy. We're
right.
at that part of the movie already.
Oh yeah. But the problem is, that you are an incredibly, astute, educated, on the ball person because you're in our world. I mean, and I'm sure you hang around with people that are similar to you, but what percentage of millennials are where you are in terms of the understanding of this? I mean, I don't know. I hope it's large. I know it's growing. I mean, I think basically everybody should, be handing out copies of Safe's book to their friends. I mean, I do it all the time. I mean, I think the only way we win this fight is we recruit as many people as we possibly can all over the world to understand the nature of the fight. And, we all feel, I mean, it's hard. I mean, you often think to yourself, what can one person do, right? I mean, there are billions of people in the world, and these people at the top have all the levers, and they can lie, and they can, they can do all the stuff they do. And, true. But, there's that great meme where they're standing out on the end of a board and we're all standing on the other end of it, right?
Yep.
And if we decide to walk away, they're fucked. And so, and that's happening. I mean, and they're going to get older and die off, and you guys are going to get into more positions of power and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it has to be pushed to an extreme where people feel pain. Specifically for my generation, Netflix and TikTok are hell of a drugs, and they are very good at distracting people from what's going on. I've lost most of my normie friends because I can't commute. First of all, they don't want to hang out with me, and I don't want to hang out with them. Why don't they want to hang out with me? Because if they hang out with me for beers, and it's like, bro, there's a revolution going on. They're trying to enslave us.
I got to answer this one question. Totally cast iron. I mean, what the fuck?
I was about to end the show with that question.
I mean, Jesus Christ! I mean, you know how hard it is to clean stainless? Yeah, I run a full node. Yeah, I already run one. I mean, fucking stainless steel sucks. Cast iron is so much better. I don't get that.
Guys, this is towards the end of the podcast, so drop your questions in the chat, and you have a chance to ask Lawrence yourself. So now cast iron. He runs a node. What temperature do you like your steak, Lawrence?
I'm kind of a medium rare sort of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think one of the guys on the chat made a great point. It was a small minority that fought the British. I mean, it's it's if we're small and we're loud and we've got the truth on our side, we're going to win. I don't have any doubt.
We're definitely going to win. I have no doubt in my mind. But what keeps me up at night is definitely the transition, and I think that's the part that is.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's pretty sad. But it's like the Billy Joel song. We didn't start this fire. You know what I mean? I mean.
We didn't start this fire, but we're definitely going to put it out. That's for sure.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think your generation is going to be the hero generation. I mean, I look at, Jack Mahler saying, he'd die on this hill. I mean, I had tears in my eyes. I mean, Marty Bent, you guys, all you guys. I mean, it's, you guys are going to do it. I mean, and you got some older guys here along to help you along the way who've seen it all before. I mean, we try to guide you a little bit just based on our experience because, I've been watching these people for 40 years. I mean, earlier you alluded to it. I mean, I'm I'm an analyst, right? I like to figure shit out. That's kind of, that's why I was put here. That's my highest and best use. And you know, the biggest thing I dug into for many, many years was the JFK assassination, right? And I've read just about everything there is to read, including a lot of private stuff that's not published. And I am so certain that without a doubt, the CIA and our government murdered Kennedy. I mean, it's beyond, there's just no question in my mind. And so, rather sadly, we were the greatest country in the world, post World War II. We saved the world, although, the Russians played a big role in that because they lost 9 million people fighting the Germans before we got involved. But, the people who took control of the CIA post World War II and some of the things they did were just unbelievably evil and un-American. And it's really sad, and we gotta take the controls away from them. We gotta go back to the founding principles, the founding documents of this country, and adhere to those principles.
100%. Some people call it the deep state. I call it the administrative state because it's right up in your grill and it is funded by the money printer.
Exactly right.
So one last question, and then we're gonna close up the stream. Lawrence, we have a question from Jeff Ross. It was fun having breakfast with you at Broadmoor, Larry.
Question. Oh yeah, he's great.
From your time at the gold conference, what are a few of your favorite gold miners at current prices?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm happy to share a few names. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. Gold mining business is a shitty business. Okay, I mean, you're breaking rocks, you got to replace them, and as we know, ultimately gold will be replaced by Bitcoin. But that's going to take some time because all the boomers have all the money, and all the boomers believe in gold, not Bitcoin. So to answer Jeff's question, probably my favorite large miner is Equinox. My favorite smaller miners are some of the silver miners like Guanajuato Silver, which I have a big piece of and I love. I also like Silver Tiger, which is a drill story. I mean, these are risky stocks, but they're also stocks that could go up 10x. I just did a call for Real Vision where they asked me my top 3 ideas. My top 3 ideas were Equinox, Cisco Mining, and Guanajuato Silver. But I hesitate in offering those because, even one of those could not work. Anyone who's going to invest in gold stocks needs to have 10 of them. And the reason for that is that there's too much Murphy's Law going on in gold. I mean, something could go wrong in any one of these companies. They all, in my opinion, have the ability to be 5 to 10 baggers, but one of them won't be. One of them will go to zero. So if you just buy one gold stock, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Although I would say probably, at the absolute safest level, I mean, if I were putting my mother's money into gold stocks, I'd probably buy Agnico. It's the safest big major, but it's a 3. It prints, to my way of seeing it, prints as a 2 or a 3 bagger. Whereas most of what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get 5 and 10 baggers, and they have slightly more risk.
Jeff, you just got some pure alpha from the man, the myth, the legend, Lawrence Lepard himself.
Hardly.
All right, guys, that was the show. Lawrence, where could people find you? What are you working on nowadays?
Well, I live outside of Boston, Massachusetts. If you
Not like visit, that.
you can DM me, and I've gone out for beers with. I don't drink alcohol, but I've gone out for coffee with lots of Bitcoiners up here. I'm on Twitter a lot. As I'm the ultimate shit poster. I hate the Fed, and the Twitter is my way of expressing, my hatred for the Fed, and I love it. I also have a fund that I manage, and a website. I publish quarterly letters, a lot of papers with talks about, various things, and they're all free. And that website is EMA, Edward Mark Alpha, the number 2.com. So you can, and there's a free mailing list there. I won't spam you. So you can look at things there. But, I'm going to the Edinburgh conference. I'll be a speaker there. I'm going to the New Orleans Gold Show. I'll be a speaker there. I'm going to Pacific Bitcoin. I'll be a speaker there. So, and I'm fortunate enough to make some great friends in this space who I have enormous respect for. starting with Jeff Booth, Greg Foss, James Lavish, Natalie Brunel, all those folks. I mean, Corey Clipston, who I think has done fabulous work. Corey, in calling out all the shitcoiners. I have enormous respect for Safe, just enormous. Caitlin Long, I have enormous respect for her as well. There's so many great people in this space, and a lot of respect for you guys at Bitcoin Magazine and so forth. So I was at a Nashville meetup, met a lot of great people there. I really enjoyed that. So it's a great community. I mean, the one thing I've said this many times, I mean, it's really fun because if you meet somebody who's a Bitcoiner, you almost instantly know you're going to like them. I mean, I'm hard pressed to think of a Bitcoiner that I don't like. I mean, if they're really a Bitcoiner, I mean, if they're a shitcoiner, I don't like them. But some people are both. But if you're a pure Bitcoiner, I'm sure we get along great.
Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on the show, Lawrence. I had a great time. I just want to mention Simply Bitcoin will be at the Pacific Bitcoin Conference. Hopefully we can get a live interview with Lawrence there. And you can take advantage of the promo code Simply to get a big discount on your tickets to Pacific Bitcoin. I also want to thank our friends at Bitcoin Magazine for allowing me to record in their studio till pretty late. So shout out to everybody at Bitcoin Mag. We love you all. Check out Bitcoin Amsterdam. It's a conference in Europe. It's in 2 weeks. You definitely want to go check it out. Guys, that was another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Lawrence, I'm going to close it out. I'm going to put you backstage.
Thanks, Nico. It's always great to be with you. I love being with guys who get it. You obviously get it. So
thanks, Lawrence. All right, guys. Take it easy. Bye.
Which one's the best crypto asset? Well, Bitcoin's the best crypto asset. Okay. What's the second best? There is no second best.